helping to, that one ship is really helping to sort of really solidify the Drake style on the exterior of ships.
And the most recent addition to Drake's pantheon of spaceships, the Drake Kraken. Now, the Kraken was a ship that we actually allowed the community to vote on last year in our You Pick the Next Drake ship, and it lost.
Yep,
it lost.
It was ahead for a long time, and then there was.
But in the end, we came up with the Vulture.
Yep.
The Kraken lost. Why did we make the Kraken?
So it was a really interesting idea. We don't have any like big carrier ships outside the Idris, really, and we wanted that variety of things. And Drake, sort of the masters of doing something the same as someone else, but on a completely different level. One of my favorite things that I want to do with it is essentially like boarding parties and landing parties. So in days of old, pirate ships would pull up into a harbor and send all their stuff out.
The sloops.
Yeah, you can do that because this thing can land. So it just lands planet-side somewhere. Because this thing can land. So it just lands planet-side somewhere. Planet-side somewhere. Go do some raiding.
Yeah. Or that even more terrifying visual, like if you're planet-side and then you see the ships swarm out from over, that's going to be quite a sight.
Actually, when I saw the commercial, as soon as I saw all the ships sort of take off of it and start attacking, it instantly reminded me of initially what made me super excited about this game, where it's, I'm gonna come in with my entire clan and we're all just gonna deploy from this one spot and attack the mission, whatever that mission is. So for me, it probably would be to do exactly what they did in the commercial. It's just fly with all my friends and then go on missions as you do it.
Well, I think that pretty much wraps.
Several months later.
So I think the example that's in 3.5 is the Reclaimer. That's the salvage ship, right? If you come into the atmosphere in the Reclaimer, it really slowly like drifts down, and you will like pump up as much as you can. It'll just keep drifting down. It just won't be able to. Don't bring it into the atmosphere, I guess, is the tip. You won't be able to get out.
Okay, now are you saying that if you land a Reclaim, there's no way to get back up to space?
Yes.
All right. I guess that's why we have a tug ship. Don't take the Reclaimer down planet side. Yeah, is that intentional, or is that just where
That's intentional.
Okay.
There is sort of like a, you know, as ships get larger and larger, they get slower and slower until eventually they reach a point. Like, for example, I think the Starfarer can get out of the atmosphere, but it's really slow. Like, it's like, you can see it struggling and struggling, but it will do it. It just takes ages.
Okay. Now, something like the Reclaimer, I mean, has pretty obvious landing gear and stuff. You know, the whole VTOL engines go, and it has a landing profile to it.
Yeah, so if you're like on a rest stop in space, then it works fine. Or if you're on a low atmosphere planet like Delamar, I think is pretty low atmosphere, or pretty low gravity, sorry. Then it works fine, and you can land and you can take off, and it works as you might expect. But like Hurston, for example, the Starfarer can escape from Damar, but it can't escape from Hurston.
Gotcha. So we're not saying that it can't land on all planets. All
Yes,
moons.
it's just ones that have gravity strong enough that it can't get out.
Gotcha. So a Reclaimer could land on something like Yella or
Yes.
I'm blanking Damar.
I haven't actually tried that, but
Okay.
I've tried Damar. And it can.
All right. So what we're saying is that there will be some planetary atmospheres where you're not going to want to take something like the Reclaimer and land, but moons or whatnot that don't have particular atmospheres, it still won't be the easiest sell in the world, but
you can do it.
Okay.
So my question is this: is the Kraken exempt from this new flight restriction of large ships not being able to land on the surface of planets, or has the Kraken kind of gotten a bit of a knockback from what CIG kind of originally talked about when they sold it? Now, this is kind of, you would think maybe an easy topic to kind of blow off. You could say, hey, well, in a lot of the promotional materials, the Kraken really was only landed at moons. That's all that we really meant. But the problem is that, when the Kraken was originally being sold, we still didn't have Lorville yet. We still didn't have Hurston. And when we got that live demo of Lorville and Hurston, CIG also showed us this. The Kraken landed at Hurston, at Lorville. So, yeah, it should be able to. I mean, you kind of showed it when you were selling the ship, and you've talked about it. You've referred to it landing planet side, not moon side, planet side. So, I think that the Kraken definitely should be able to land on a planet. Now, given the new rules and the new restrictions that CIG has implemented on larger vessels, I think that maybe it's time to kind of step back from a lot of these rules and really think about what are they really getting you? What is the real benefit? And instead of saying, well, you can't land this on a planet, you can't land that on a planet, maybe it's time to kind of accept the fact that, these larger ships are going to land on planets, but with great difficulty. Under the current system, it takes a while to get a hammerhead up out of the atmosphere of Lorville, but you can do it. And certainly Lorville is built to accommodate very large ships. A lot of these landing sites are built around the idea of accommodating very big ships. I think the very big ships should be able to, especially if they've been featured doing so, should be able to take off from a planet and get up into space. Now, the existence of a tug ship, I don't think it's any real coincidence that this revelation came, along with the amazing sale of a tug ship that can help you get these larger ships into space. But I don't think that they should be necessary. I don't think that something like a Kraken or an Idris or a Polaris should have to carry a tug ship in order to get up into space. To me, it just doesn't make sense. I think that getting out of a planet, certainly a planet with a very thick atmosphere and very heavy gravity, should be a struggle, should be difficult. It should be something that marks your skill level as a captain. You should have to divert power from one system to another, perhaps making yourself vulnerable by removing a lot of power from your shields and putting it into your engines and or your cooling system to make sure that you can get up out of that atmosphere. And as you get higher and higher up in that atmosphere, you can shift that power back to where it's needed. Interesting, in-depth gameplay that allows you to interact with your ship in many different ways apart from just the stick and the throttle. I think that that's a good idea. But I think that wholesale saying that, no, these ships aren't going to make it is frankly kind of dumb. The good side of the Kraken specifically is that the Kraken is not built yet. It's a 3D model. And I mean, even if you look at the two winglets on the front of the Kraken, which are of course reminiscent of the Cutlass, another Drake ship, you could easily see how you could put some vertical thrusters on there or within the structure of the wing, similar to maybe like a shield helicarrier from the Avengers movie, that could give you a certain amount of vertical thrust. And you would have to replicate the winglets to the rear of the ship as well to balance it all out. But you could see how something like that could be done very easily, especially considering the ship isn't even built yet, something that could be taken into consideration when the ship gets built to allow it to have this capability. A capability which has appeared in promotional art, a capability that CIG's own developers have discussed, and now something that may have a big question mark hanging on it because of recent changes to how Star Citizen works. And there's a number of these, kind of recent changes that I find to be a little bit questionable. Now, the Kraken was kind of it was that kind of way to, as you developed further, as perhaps an org or a fleet, the Kraken was a way to kind of battle some of these recent changes that we saw. I mean, the Kraken could carry a lot of those smaller vessels and allow you to explore far deeper into space. And remember, it's a space game. If you don't get to explore space, it's kind of dumb, you know? The Kraken allowed you to gain that kind of reach, especially with smaller vessels. It allowed you to bring smaller vessels along for the ride. And I think that that was kind of one of the things that would mitigate some of the anger, the discomfort over, you know, these new kind of restrictions being placed on smaller ships. The Kraken was, if you maybe got to a certain point as an organization, you could afford this, then you would be to a certain extent exempt from these rules, or it would mitigate some of the inconvenience. But I think that if there is indeed going to be a limitation placed on where the Kraken can land now, I don't think that that's really such a great idea. Had that limitation been stated outright at the sale of the ship, had they said, no, this thing is too big to really land at a planet, you know, it just doesn't have the vertical thrust, it can't do it, then I think I would have been a lot more accepting of this limitation. If they said, well, you still get to go explore space, you can still deliver forces, you would just bring your fighters and your cutlasses along for the ride, and then you would deploy them to wherever, do the whatever mission on the surface of that planet, then bring them back up and then fly away, sort of like the way the Starship Enterprise would go to a planet and maybe send down a shuttlecraft, that sort of thing. Totally accept it. I can totally accept it then. But the problem is that you promoted it and you talked about it landing on planets. Now, maybe you don't want to do like a full helicarrier idea like SHIELD. Too similar, I understand. Well, the good news is that you have this ship here, the Caterpillar. And the Caterpillar is capable of landing on planets. It is capable of handling that atmosphere and handling it quite well. The Kraken has a similar shape, a similar basic idea, so it would simply be a case of scaling the Caterpillar up to do what so that the Kraken can do what the Caterpillar can do. Now, some people might say, oh, well, there's not enough room for all that vertical, for all those vertical, control thrusters and all that business. But realistically, you've also talked about how the Kraken is not, a bespoke military vessel. It shouldn't be, it's only got civilian components. Maybe because of its size, it can carry enough thrusters instead of military components and military grade armor that it can make that flight. And that's kind of one of the upsides of it being a ship that is restricted to civilian components, is because it doesn't carry all that heavy military armor or hardware, it is able to fly down to the surface of a planet where perhaps a military ship can only do so with far greater difficulty. Now, some people might say, oh, well, these things shift, these things change. But I think that one of the biggest problems with Star Citizen, or one of the biggest challenges that CIG has to kind of keep in mind, is that this whole enterprise exists, under the expectation that, when someone, pledges or buys a ship, that ship is going to live up to what it has been sold as. Without it, you can't really say, spend $250, spend $50, spend $1,000 on a starship, and let's just see what happens. That doesn't really work, So if you're promoting something as being something, then it should be that thing. I mean, otherwise, what's the point? What's the promise? What's the guarantee? And I think that in the case of the Kraken, especially because it was so heavily, promoted and shown as being able to operate planetside, that it definitely should. Now, I'm not saying that it should be easy, but it should be capable of doing that without assistance. Anyways, that's the show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.